it's Gina. So I wanted to continue on with the story of Esther. So basically, in the first video, I was sharing that the king had got rid of his queen, and then all the women were being groomed to meet the king to see who would be his new queen. So Esther indeed won this position. So now Esther is the new queen. We find out that Mordecai had heard that there was an assassination attempt to be done on the king. He told Esther, and Esther basically saved the king. So then after this, Haman was the kind of right hand of the king. He had convinced him that all the Jews were basically of no good and needed to all be killed. So the king, trusting Haman, said, okay, well then I'll give you this, my signet ring, you can make this happen. So Mordecai heard of this, the Jews heard of this, they were all grieving, fasting, mourning for what was to occur. And so then Mordecai went to Esther and said, can you please speak to the king, because this is what's going to happen to our people. So Esther said, give me 3 days, have all of the Jews fast, and then I will make a choice of how I will address this. So after 3 days, Esther went before the king, didn't say anything, and he put down a scepter, which allowed her to speak. She just then said, can I have dinner with you tomorrow and throw a banquet for you? And so at the banquet, Esther remained quiet. She listened, she observed, and the king said, what is it that she would like? He had offered her half of his kingdom. And she said, I'd like to have another banquet tomorrow with you. So he agreed to have dinner again with her. So then the next night, they're at their dinner, and the queen finally spoke and said, I am Jewish. I am of the Jewish people, and I'd like for you to save my people. There has been this law gone through that they will all be killed. And he says, well, who has done this? Well, Haman arranged it. He wants to have all of the Jews killed. So the king said, well, no, then I won't have them killed. But because it had already gone into law, because of the king's first petition, they had to then make a clause in which the Jews could fight back. Previously, they could not fight back. They were just to be killed. So now the Jews had the ability to fight back against the soldiers that were coming. And so in the end, there was great favor on the Jews. God gave them great strength and might, and they actually defeated the other army and were preserved because of Esther. And then also another thing that had happened in this story was that Malachi was given an honor, but before this happened, Haman was speaking to the king, and the king had planned to reward Malachi for his great deed in expressing he was going to be assassinated. So Haman, it's kind of funny because he's like, well, he should have this great, parade in the streets and robes and all these fantastic things. And so Haman actually had to do this for Malachi, which is kind of funny. But then at the end, Haman himself was hung. He was killed. The Jews were saved, and Esther was a beautiful queen and had the ear and favor of the king, and Malachi became in the position of Haman. And so this is a story of great courage of Esther, who went before the king, who could have been killed for speaking, but she trusted God. She fasted, the people fasted, so they petitioned to God for favor, and indeed that God was very favorable to the people of Israel, the Jews. So the story of beautiful Esther, the very brave queen. Thanks.